Last question, Dr. Dallin. Are you sure the perimeter surrounding the zone is really enough? If a powerful emission were to occur, we...
Listen, the zone has remained stable for years. Besides, we didn't establish the most advanced institution in human history without first guaranteeing its safety. As the head of the Scientific Institute for Research of the Chernobyl area, or CIRCA for short, I believe the wonders that we will bring to the world far outweigh the potential risks.
How big are these risks exactly?
The zone reveals a whole new world. We can stick with the old one, fearing change. But tell me, do you want our descendants to remember us as cowards?
Featuring a rich mix of gunplay, story, weather, and the zone itself, we follow the protagonist Skiff and his quest to get answers about a mysterious artifact that landed in his laundry basket and destroyed his home. Along the way, we deal with various characters and factions, all wanting different things for the zone. Some to control, some to free, and some to destroy. But Chernobyl is an unwilling beast that always pushes back. And just as you feel comfort within a new base or weapon, the game reminds you that you are at the bottom of the food chain.
What's that? Some kind of anomaly. Quiet. I see the scanner. Tracing for anomalous activity in radio signals. Situation unclear. You inside. You to the roof. Move out. HQ, move out reporting. Come in, HQ. Damn it. Stalker PDA detected. Someone here! Finish him, and let's make tracks.
This is Stalker 2, Heart of Chernobyl. Man, after spending almost 100 hours in Stalker, playing, recording, and just messing around, I can confidently say that the zone is such a huge character in both the story and general gameplay. Whether it's anomalies, traversal, or just the buildings themselves, everything to do with the zone makes Stalker 2 shine. So let's break down each zone and see what they're like. The first time we entered the Lesser Zone, we met with Richter, a man who knows the ups and downs of the zone all too well. Yet, in such a cruel world, he almost seems optimistic, going out of his way to help you, a stranded stalker, to a local town called Zilicia. When I first entered Zilicia, the first thing I noticed was how run down yet almost lively it looked. Fellow stalkers were about the street, sounds were heard on almost every corner, whether it was music or people making god awful jokes, there's always something going on. Zilicia has a very open layout and is extremely easy to navigate, which ties down with the list zone itself. The area never felt like it was forcing you to take a long route or go around some annoying obstacle. There are a few cool places to explore. The poppy fields are a highlight, giving you an introduction of how you can handle different sections in the zones, not just by exploring, but giving you an introduction to anomalies and different side objectives. It's a great mission slapped on top. I also felt like just exploring the lesser zone and walking into different buildings was a great way to learn different aspects of the game. The area holds your hand until you're ready to move on.
Shit, Shapka. Fuck, another stalker.
Hey there, Stalker boy.
Enter Garbage. After completing a few main story missions and hopefully a few side missions, you end up leaving for Garbage. When entering Garbage, I first encountered a small little side mission to save a guy from bandits. Cool, I thought. I wonder where it would lead. I picked the threaten option and ended up having to blast them away. Oh well, I'll get to help this random. Then he gives me the most disappointing stash known to mankind, which really encapsulates my thoughts on Garbage. The zone just feels like more of the Lesser Zone, which isn't bad, as the Lesser Zone was great. I was expecting a lot more buildings just filled with trash and random objects, hence Garbage. It does have great side missions though, and some great character moments, which are probably its strengths. Oh, and the Slag Heap, which is quite different from the rest of the zone. Slag Heap is big, homely, and just downright cool. It's filled with a lot of radiation, and of course garbage. And the layout for Slag Heap can be a little confusing at first, but once you get used to it, it's a great place to start. It's filled with really cool characters and a bunch of cool side quests. I felt that overall Garbage was fine, but I thought Slag Heap was an extremely thematic base, considering the area, and was part of my top 3 bases.
The mutants took me down. I need help.
Considering its name, I expected this area to be pretty boring. And I was half right. It's not filled with as many items as I was expecting, and it's connected to Wild Island. Plus, POIs are kind of lacking. So what's good about it? Well, to start off, the base itself was really cool. It was pretty interactive and it really felt like an actual checkpoint. Plus, the area was a really easy way to farm for artifacts, which was great. But I think at the end of the day, it just felt so underwhelming. Sure, it wasn't as bored as I was expecting to be, but it still felt lacking. I think if it had a few more POIs to spruce up the area, it might be a little better, but I mean, it just needs more. I mean, Reloading Point and Concrete Jungle are decent, but still felt underwhelming. There are way better areas to explore, and my time here just felt too brief. Now, onto probably my most hated zone in the game. I genuinely stopped playing a few times here in this zone because of how badly designed it is. Wild Island is normally pretty central to the story, and honestly, had some great story moments. The zone has just so much potential, but the surrounding area is hard to navigate and the entrance is annoying to get to. The base itself was fine, but it didn't feel as cool as Slag Heap or as Lycia. Now, onto my problem with Wild Zone. Well, it's in the name. Island. Whoever decided the player should be slowed down to an absolute halt while walking through water and then forcing the player to go through said water is a madman. I wouldn't be mad if it was avoidable, but it never felt like it was. If you missed a jump on a certain bridge in the train carriage section, you would die, which was super infuriating. It was just really annoying every time I had to go to the island, and that actually felt like a fair amount.
You went off the rails.
After exiting that hellhole, we finally ended up in Zaton. In my first playthrough, I barely remembered Zaton's name, and just ran through, enjoying myself and enjoying the missions. But looking back on it now, and going through it once more, Zaton has got to be up there on one of my favorite areas. Now, it's 2 out of 3 connections, Wild Island and Swamp, make me want to cry. But Zaton itself is just awesome. I mean, a massive chunk of land, sprawling with random POIs and cool little things to look at. There's boats, labs, and, well, everything in between. Speaking of POIs, I really enjoyed Lviv, and the side mission that dragged me there. The boat itself is okay, but fighting on it was just so unique and something I wish Stalker had more of. Bigger set fights that forced you to get creative with cover and angles. 4 Cranes was also pretty awesome, and the mission tied to it was great. The unique gun you get was really enjoyable, and all around I had a great time. I guess Zaton's only downside would be those ridges that forced you to look for another way around, but that's not a Zaton problem. But how about the bases? Well, Zaton has 3 separate bases. Sounds weird considering most have 1 or 2, but Zaton deserves it. First off was Icarus, the ward base, which was pretty cool and exactly what you think of when the words ward base pop into your mind. There was a few detached buildings with the main one serving as the bed and traders. It felt like a thematic base well done. It just wasn't super practical, but it sure did look awesome. Oh yeah, Sotansk and Shivenko. They are the icing on top of the cake. Did I mention boats? How about bases in boats? Sotansk was the bigger base, but they felt so alike it was easy to get confused. They both have a pretty straightforward layout and great traders, and I really enjoyed my time here, but I often wouldn't go back due to their placement on the map. And also the lighting, but that could have been my settings. Overall, Zaton was definitely a top 3 zone. I just really enjoyed my time here. Yeah, might as well talk about the swamps. You come here after completing a few story missions, and then afterwards, well, you probably wouldn't come back here again. That's unless you're crazy. There are no bases, barely any POIs, and honestly, there's nothing special. I'm just glad this zone isn't very large, and it's mostly bearable. I had such a horrible time here trying to slowly walk through the water. I'm happy it's not radiated, to be honest, but I just don't have much to say about the swamps other than I genuinely had the worst time ever there. Walking, fighting, everything just felt so horrible to do. But it does live up to its name, plus there has to be at least one annoying zone, right? Just sucks that they force you to go through here. Anyway, let's get back to some better zones. Gordon at its basic is just an extension of the lesser zone. It doesn't feel very special, and I kind of ignored it throughout my first playthrough. That's until I was forced to go there for the main story. Then, when I did end up going, I just mostly waltzed throughout the area without a care in the world. The base, Rookie Village, is an open town that was fine, but again, very basic. It really felt like a small Zalicia, and while that may not seem bad, it felt like it wasn't mixing it up. The area easily could have been an early game attachment to the lesser zone, or even the way out towards the rest of the zone, making us go through the checkpoint towards the bottom, either by fighting our way out or siding with the faction holding it, which probably more than likely would have been the ward. I'm also really surprised that this wasn't the starting area. It's a lot easier to deal with, it doesn't have a whole lot going on. The lesser zone was really good to start with, so I guess no complaints from me. Hope your thermal protection is high, Stalker. We're walking into burner territory. Burn Forest feels more like a connecting area with no bases and only a few missions. Mainly the X-15 lab, which was in a main story mission, but it was really, really cool. The area itself is decent-ish. The POIs of interest are probably X-15 and maybe for its unique gear inside. Other than that, I felt disappointed by Burnt Forest. I wasn't expecting a ton of buildings, as the anomalies themselves are way more important than buildings, and for a good reason. The place is mostly uninhabitable. Walking around you can see that, and having a ton of life with loads of buildings wouldn't make sense. So I completely understand that, but it just feels like there should be more. Moving on to Chemical Plant. I loved the way it looked. I mean, come on. Chemical spillage, toxic environments. Surely this place would be dangerous and filled with awesome loot. Yet, I had the feeling when I was walking around of, ah yes, another empty building just over and over again. That gets very boring very quickly. Sure, there are a few cool weapons and attachments, but it feels like that's what I'm looking for. Just not sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. The base itself is locked until further on in the main mission, and is generally okay, but nothing special. It's just a ward base surrounded by ward things. I mean, the outside looks cool with patrolling guards and vehicles, but nothing on the inside screams ward. Like Icarus, I guess. Then, the POIs. Nothing screamed out to me. The chemical tanks are cool to look at, but pretty much useless. There are a few warehouses and factories, but nothing had interesting loot or anything of value to me. It still looked really awesome, but just felt empty. Yeah, first time running across Juga, I got my head taken off by a sniper. Not the best way to enter a new area, but when you realize the entrance south is a whole lot safer, it's a pretty cool area. It's more used in the story, and That's honestly a little disappointing, as Duga has a huge potential to be such a cool area. I mean, we do have Pripyat, but coming up on Duga is just really cool. And honestly, using it for the story seems like such a waste. Give us an underground section or a subway or just high rises with guard patrols to kind of get us prepared for Pripyat. At the end of the day, I still really liked the missions in Duga and a lot of the cutscenes, but it just feels like it's missing that generic gameplay section. Malachite STC is my favorite bugged out base. Yeah, first playthrough, it was pretty much impossible for me to access this space due to a guy standing in a door and refusing to move. However, I managed to break in and was able to use the other door. That being said, this base is still awesome. Not only does it have an easy layout, but it also has a few cool story missions. Buggy, but cool. So how about Malachite the area? Awesome as well. Walking across can be a pain due to the cliffs, but each POI was stocked with stuff having an attachment in basically every area. And I felt like I was just really enjoying my time there. That's until I had to run to another area and walk around 60 kilometers worth of cliff sides. Kidding. But Malachite definitely will be a top contender for my favorite zone, which is weird considering there's nothing really special about it. In its defense, I guess that's kind of what makes it feel special, as it really felt the most Stalker zone out of all of them. Yanta. What can I say? The area feels small and the POIs are limited, but that doesn't make it a bad area. It shows the theme of this broken wasteland and feels really cool to explore. It was a bit too filled with mutants, especially when I ran to 4 different mutants at once, but it kind of had this charm to it. The airbase was super well designed, seeing all these broken down helicopters had a vibe to it, but the area didn't have a lot of loot or objects. The entire production complex was also pretty big and open, but still felt empty. I understand stalkers have been around and the ward too, but it just feels like there's no point going to Yenta unless you want to look around or for missions. But it's still a really well themed area. I feel like I keep repeating myself. I don't want to be completely negative, but a lot of these zones could be described the same. A good looking area with a great base, and barely any POIs. The difference? Well, Rostock is the base. It's pretty much half the zone. Also, what happened to naming bases something other than zones? It gets kind of confusing. The POIs are definitely lacking, and there really is only the city. That's cool to explore, but once you've done that, you might as well move on, which is a little disappointing, but it's not meant to be anything but Rostock. And Rostock? Well, it is something. Sure, sometimes it can be hard to navigate, and you might get your socks fried off, but it does have a beauty to it. The combination of anomalies and people living together, plus that huge floating ball in the middle, just beautiful. Rostock was really cool to explore, and the side missions there are pretty good. From getting some bread to a gladiatorial ring, it really was a great base. Considering the size of these 3 areas, I've decided to group them into a single section. Now, all the zones are entirely different thematically. The Red Forest is, well, a red forest, and definitely the coolest of the 3 by far. There's a few story missions, and looks very pretty, but all up just super empty. I mean, there are a bunch of attachments, but most of it's just forest. Next, Yanov, which has Yanov base, and also a few more buildings and attachments, but it just turns into a slog, as there is a bit of water in the middle, and that makes getting through a really annoying trek. Lastly, Jupiter. Jupiter, honestly, is just a way to get through to Pripyat and has nothing special. So, let's list some POIs. Well, Red Forest has a few, but nothing special worth bringing up. Yanov Station has, well, Yanov Station and that massive tornado. And Jupiter has a few cool buildings with some attachments in it, but yeah, a bit disappointing personally. I'm sure there are something in these zones, but I just didn't feel like exploring them. I was just too excited to get to Pripyat. Walking into Pripyat was breathtaking. It was a massive city block that houses mutants, various factions, and a bunch of unique gear. Pripyat was just breathtaking to explore. Walking into different buildings to find an abundance of attachments, weapons, or enemies was just awesome and something that was missing from the other areas. It's not all perfect. The buildings are all pretty much the same on the outside, so it can become a little bland to look at, but then you go ahead and find a new section and boy oh boy is it just so awesome. I loved walking across a patch of poisonous plants to find a few dead bodies and an artifact, then turning around to walk into buildings and finding them boarded up with people chilling inside. I think when the game gets more optimized, the streets should be filled with some other stalkers also trying to find loot or enemies patrolling. While true, story wise it is meant to be hard to enter, they should be more veteran with better gear and such. I just feel like it would liven up the city and make the place more of a threat. Pripyat's base was also pretty bland, but honestly, I didn't care. It still looked cool, and the area around it made up for it so much. My first playthrough, I never really went here. Only recently did I check it out. There are some cool areas, the Fire Tornado, Red Fortress, and a few smaller buildings, but deep down I felt like it was missing something. It just felt like I never saw anyone, and the place felt dead. Sure, I could run around and see cool sights, but surely there would be people checking out the Fire Tornado, or at least trying to scavenge from other areas. I'd recommend running around here for a bit, at least checking out the Fire Tornado, but past that, it's definitely better off going to other places. Overall, I think each zone is suffering from the same problem. While the map design is awesome, it feels so void of loot and people. I enjoy just running around and killing stuff and looting anomalies, but surely there should be more bandits or stalkers. And I don't think this is a problem with the maps. Deep down, I feel like it has more to do with the performance of the game. If we did have more going on, it may start to struggle when walking near POIs and bases, which would alienate people with lower end systems. Yet, I still feel like adding some more basic items would be great, as well as adding a bit more to the game. Overall, I think the zone deserves a solid 8 out of 10. With a bit more work going into POIs, I could see this being the best part of the game. But enough about the maps. Time to talk about the gameplay. So now that we know the maps, how does it feel to get around? Honestly, horrible. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be negative here and complain as much as possible, but this is probably one of the worst systems of the game. The stamina just feels non-existent. It feels like you're just walking 70% of the game, which is especially true if you're overweight. This makes the map feel like such a drag to get around, which is a shame, considering I liked walking around the map. See the sights, loot, kill enemies. It's just sad I would rather fast travel than run. It'd be great to see some way to improve stamina throughout the game, even if that's getting exosuit upgrades to help. It would be really good, especially late game. Bread and butter of Stalker. How did the guns feel? Well, they lacked variety. If you stand directly still, most guns are extremely easy to control. The AK was a great change-up for the rifles, as it did kind of feel hard to control. The shotguns and snipers had a great punch, and I ended up running with them most of the game. The SMGs just felt like point-and-click adventures, which sucks because I was expecting high fire rate guns that would have a hard-to-control vertical recoil. Other than the feel, the guns looked great. The animations were super detailed and smooth, plus they just sounded amazing. Most shotguns would sound meaty and hard hitting, while the SMGs are a lot lighter, making it super easy to spot in a fight. You can see how much detail went into each gun's look and animation. It just feels so well done. So how about fueling these bad boys? Well, you get a few bullets to pick from for each weapon, but did it feel like it mattered? Well, yes and no. Each weapon's benefited from specific ammo, more in certain situations, and maybe if I played on a higher difficulty, it becomes more useful. But on a lower difficulty, AP rounds pretty much shred most things. If you do need something to do more flesh damage, bring shotgun rounds. In most case scenarios where you would need to change as something big and scary is coming after you, shotguns normally shred. That's not what you can do with weapons. Looking into this game, I was super excited for an in-depth gun customization system. But after going to the NPC to customize my guns, I was sorely disappointed. Not only was I not expecting this upgrade system, I was not expecting an upgrade system so boring. I mean, I understand how much time would have gone into a fully fledged modding system for weapons, but at least make the upgrade system fun and unique for the player. Instead, it just feels like you click a few times and that's it. And honestly, I could barely tell most upgrades were on the weapon. Upside is you can place a few weapon attachments which are pretty nice, and hopefully in the future, the list of attainable attachments will be expanded, as sometimes it does feel a bit boring and straightforward what can go on weapons. Originally in writing the script, I had some pretty bad things to say about the combat of this game. It's still not perfect, but the patches make it feel way better. First of all, pre-patch, most mutants would require mags to go down and didn't feel like worth fighting at all, considering the loot behind was normally awful. Now, it's improved and feels a lot nicer on your ammo. But how about combat with fellow humans? Well, that's hard to answer. I did enjoy mowing down enemies with the variety of weapons the game provides, and up close and personal, it feels completely fine. I mean, it's not perfect. Enemies are often hard to find, and they just kind of rotate around the player until they die. Inside buildings, they are kind of hard to spot until they light you up, but when they do, most times, it's a bit of a disappointment. I mean, getting magged up and losing half my health and bleeding kind of feels a bit lame. I wasn't expecting Tarkov levels of health system, but maybe something along as I've Arena Breakout Infinite, which kind of aligns with the arcadey feel the game has going for it. It just felt like most fights I was walking around with a shotgun, and when I got hit, I hid and healed. Only a few times did I get into a pickle, forcing me to improvise with grenades and other weapons. So how about far away? The game has its fair share of single-shot rifles, and the guns felt fine. I had no problems with the way they felt at long range. The issue was when the AI would just laser me from ages away. Up close, it's barely noticeable, considering they know where you are anyway. But far away, it just feels horrible when you get lasered from a fair bit away and you can barely see them. I think it boils down to my problem with the combat as a whole. The AI. They almost feel dumb. Not wanting to search or walk around makes them lack personality. And I don't think it's just the combat that suffers from the NPCs being dumb. I think the whole game suffers because of it. It's just noticeable in combat because you are an active player in that situation. How about after it cools down, when the enemies are gone and the mutants asleep? What goodies lie in the buildings deep? And more meds. Yeah, not sure what I was expecting. In my mind, I feel like I wanted more. More weapon attachments, more things to sell, more life in the buildings. I think at the start of the game, looting feels way better, especially considering you're always looking for an upgrade, ammo, or just about anything. Going out of your way to get some better loot feels worth it. I loved forcing myself to pick up a worse gun just because I ran out of ammo for the ones I had in my hand. But then you get further in and honestly, I felt super bored walking around random buildings trying to find new items. And mostly, I think that's because the buildings just felt so empty. Whenever I was pulled over to help an NPC, I always had to look around just to find 3 bottles of water and a bandage. This punished me later on, mostly because I felt like I missed out on so much good loot. Looking online, there seems to be so many awesome unique guns. I just couldn't be bothered to go for them because I didn't want to run up and down buildings to be disappointed. So now that we have at least 2 weapons in our backpack and 6 million bandages, what do we do with it all? You have 3 options. Use it, store it, or sell it. Now, if you're an avid gamer, you are well aware that selling it will normally put you forward basically a tenth the cost the NPCs would sell it for. Which is fine. Currency shouldn't be easy to come by, especially in a place like this. But it almost feels useless to sell items, unless you're selling them in bulk, in which case you will end up getting enough money to make it seem worth. Also, not being able to sell red durability items was frustrating the first time around when you stocked your inventory full of them. Learning curve, I guess. Other than selling your gear, NPCs can also assist you in a few ways. Firstly, they sell back to you. Gear, meds, ammo, whatever you need, they'll sell it. Secondly, they can repair and mod. Lastly, some NPCs will give you side missions, ranging from find this artifact to going on this epic adventure to save people with twists and shocks in between. Some rivaling the main story themselves, which is great to see. Plus, most NPCs felt immersive, sitting by campfires, telling jokes, or just telling you to kindly go away in a not so kind way. A great change of pace to go inside towns to see everyone getting a drink. It's such a world drained of happiness. I wasn't sure where to fit emissions and anomalies into this review. I'd talked about them, but struggled to put them into a specific section. So I decided to bring any leftover things I wanted to talk about to this section here. So let's start with the emissions and anomalies. Anomalies in Stalker felt the same level of necessity as guns. Without them, the game would feel empty. Walking around the map, it does just feel like it fills it out, adding a level of complexity to otherwise straightforward gunfights. Got enemies running towards you? Jump into an electric field and watch them get shocked. I guess the only problem was finding a way out, as these will start to hurt, especially the bonus. I really enjoyed the way anomalies were added into the game. They felt extremely well paced and never forced in any area. The missions are super cool as well. It functioned more of a light show than a challenge. You just get in some cover and boom, you gotta wait it out. Maybe if these had more functions, like cutting into specific zones for a bit, where you could still enter, going from building to building, and maybe rare artifacts could spawn, but I guess that's also harder to program, so there's that. Next, the mutants. In my combat section, I briefly touched on how spongy these guys used to be. However, due to some updates, they've become way more balanced, and every fight I had against one felt good, forcing you to back off way more and get defensive because of their increased damage and health. Then they make you get aggressive, get in their face before they block your attack or become invisible. Whether I was being swarmed with packs of dogs or going up against a chimera, every fight felt nicely done. Even if I did end up hopping on a car and shooting from afar, the only thing I could say about the mutants is I wish they did a bit more damage while not being able to stun me as much. I would rather be dead than stuck on the floor waiting to get up. Overall, the combat felt like it needed a bit more oomph. Tweaking the guns to make them a little harder to handle until they got modifications would be great. Allowing modders to get in there and change the modification system would also be great, but highly unlikely. Then you have looting, which was just really disappointing. The game needs way more items to sell, so it's worth going places. The NPCs are the only saving grace, and by far a great addition to each base. Once the AI is fixed for combat, I think they'll be perfect. That's why I'm giving gameplay a 7 out of 10. Next, let's talk about graphics. Stalker 2 is a stunning game at heart. I mean, the anomalies can just look so well done, especially some of the bigger ones. The tornado, that bull in Rostock. I mean, all the scenes that are meant to look good look great. Every time, it seems like the developer has put a lot of effort into these big moments. But it's not just that. Walking around the zone feels so cinematic. There's always some type of weather event going on, making it moody, or a gunfight in the distance. And honestly, Stalker 2 never felt like it was just plain hideous. Sure, it had its problems towards the start, but I don't think it was the game's fault. I mean, my settings were not set at all, so that could have been the problem. Once I'd finished with my settings, the game is starting to look really good. I mean, there are some problems with the LOD, making stuff look ugly a little too close, but I'm only playing on medium, and I'm genuinely surprised at how nice the game is looking. But it wasn't just the textures that look great, every little detail just fit in the game. The placement of bottles and bases near fellow stalkers, the way bases are laid out to show off some of Stalker's more beautiful sceneries, all of it just came together to help make a visually stunning game. So how does it feel on my computer? I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm not running top of the line hardware at all. My computer has an RTX 3060 with a Ryzen 7 3700X, which is getting pretty old. I put the game on my Samsung SSD to ensure it would load fine, and I have 32GB of RAM. Also, all tests are done with DLSS settings just to keep it standard. Messing with this setting will surely change the result, but I found DLSS best looking for my computer. Low to high, here is the average frame rate that I was able to get from running through the starting town. Now, this doesn't reflect the actual gameplay, as the town isn't very demanding at all. Some scenes in the game used all the resources it could pull, and brought my FPS back down to 20 on medium. Regardless, frame generation is definitely carrying this game on its back. Even on low, my computer would stutter, and sometimes just freeze. It's a real shame, as I don't think the game looks that demanding on low. I could understand on medium, but low looked bad. The game looks great on epic, and I think it's a shame I can't play like that constantly, but my computer is nowhere near those specs. I think the worst part is the stuttering that can happen, which can be frustrating in the middle of an important moment. Now, some mods were supposed to help out, but I never felt that was the case. I mean, it does say on the mod page that it may not improve everyone's game, so it could be worth a shot. Looking at the supplied Stalker 2 system requirements chart, they're pretty much on the ball with specs to settings for me, but only with FSR frame generation. So consider that with your PC. Overall, the graphics and performance definitely deserve a 7 out of 10. The graphics are really pulling that number up, but I'm sure once performance is fixed, that number could go up. Anyways, let's move on to the story.
I knew you could do it. Well, okay, I didn't really know, but I sure hoped you would. How'd you get here without any gear?
Originally, this section was going to be a breakdown of the story, almost mission by mission. But honestly, that's a whole lot of talking and spoiling, especially considering the game has multiple different paths and twists. So instead, here's my review of each section of the game with some clips of random story moments. The introduction, visually and story-wise, a really good start. Opening with a bit of a showcase of the story while treating us to the beauty of the zone set me in a good mood. Then, after being introduced to our character, we get straight into some sneaking around. As tutorials go, it's fine. It doesn't feel like it needs to be anything special, and it introduces you to the main points of the game. I feel like tutorials in this type of game aren't needed, as it's more of a learn as you go type. Then again, I did have a few problems with learning by doing later on in the game, so I guess it's hard to say. Then, after being introduced to a few characters, we are knocked out and woken up by Richter. Richter is a reoccurring character who's extremely fleshed out. In my first playthrough, I took the Ward side, and seeing his reaction was really awesome. He is by far my most favourite character. Afterwards, we headed straight to Zalicia, where we are introduced to the Ward and local inhabitants. It's always great to see that dynamic between factions, and this felt like it came off naturally, especially as Richter was just talking about why they would show up. Next, we have a chat with a few people around the place, find some gear, do some quests, and then go off to get the Ward equipment. Skipping ahead, we do the Behind the Seven Seals mission, which is a really cool quest and begins the choice of which side you want to take. While it may feel really quick to choose sides, it actually feels really good later on when you question whether you made the right choice. It makes these earlier choices impact the player way more. The quest ends with you escaping the sphere and moving on to the zone. This was a great introduction to Stalker and got me excited for the rest of the game. Once you pick your side, you move on towards being able to explore the rest of the game. Then, after you're done exploring around, we move on to the Slag Heap, which gives us a really cool story mode with Richter. We move on to a few cool story missions, the first being Varan, which I really enjoyed, and a solid mission all around. And that can go either way depending on how you play it. It felt nice not being railroaded, which was good. Then, heading back to Slag Heap, we end up meeting the Ward higher-ups. That was also really cool. My first playthrough, I ended up getting a unique gun for siding with the Ward, and it was awesome to see the different cutscene when I didn't side with them. Afterwards, we go to Noontide and meet Strata and Faust, which wraps up all the main people you meet for now. There is one more big character, but that's a little later on. After a few pretty simple missions, we end up at Circa, which is way different to anything we've seen, and really shows what the Ward is capable of. Then, we walk around Circa, when it is attacked by Strider, trying to stop the Ward from using a certain technology. We have a big choice of siding with either Strider or the Ward, and this choice is extremely important, and I like these situations. Onto the mid game. After Circuit, we have a few more boring missions of walking around and just collecting stuff. Then we have the Assault on Duga, which ultimately ends in being a pretty alright mission. I was expecting way more in terms of the Assault, but I guess that's the limit on the game engine. Still, a really good mission that ends off in a few boring missions and then picks back up and has a really cool boss fight. I don't understand why the game felt the need to prolong this boss fight and make us run around to a different area. I feel like the pacing was just super off, and a lot of this is just padded in the mid game. The boss fight was still really good, and the cutscene afterwards is such a great moment. After this, we move on to the late game. Moving forward, we have a few mediocre missions, specifically the missions with the Doctor, which I found to be mind-numbing. They just felt so go here, do this type of mission. This is unfortunate, as the better missions are the ones where outside forces impact factors in the mission. Then, finally, after a few boring missions, we get to meet Strela. The cutscene where we introduced to him was super awesome way to beat him, showing us how capable he is. Some characters can show up depending on if you let them live beforehand or not, and it is really cool to see. Then we get a few more missions. This ends up leading towards which side we are picking for the final mission. This felt really well done. It was nice to see how our choices matter. This leads us to the last missions. Now, without going into too much detail, the last few missions are incredible. I genuinely enjoyed everything going on. Since I started with Ward, I fought against Strelok for the final fight, and the rest of the scenes are just breathtaking and super emotional, especially with what happens to certain characters. It was a great ending to a great game. So while I tried to not go into too much detail, I also felt like I skipped over a lot. My playthroughs have amassed about 70 hours, which has allowed me to soak in a lot of the story. I found it amazing. It had a few low points, which was mostly the fetch quests, but that's fine. I just wish they had something special and not just run here and run back. It gets pretty boring, but the high points, finding the people who you've spared, seeing how your actions affect the world, and watching those amazing cutscenes, I felt like a movie with how well done they are. The story got a 9 out of 10, and that was honestly so well deserved. So that's the current story of the game. Let's look into the future. So let's talk about the future. Well, Stalker 2 has been getting a large number of bug fixes. The first patch alone was said to be 650 plus fixes, and there have already been a few more out, with the latest being 1.0.3, and I'm sure there are going to be way more on the way. The community manager has also posted on Discord regarding some fixes, stating the main issues are A-Life, mutant balances, economy balance, day-night cycle, optimization, and quest issues. Well, at least that's what's on top of their priority list, but I'm sure there will be more items added to that list, considering they're supposedly doing 2 story expansions and further DLC, according to the Ultimate Edition. I'm sure they'll be fine, but honestly, I'm way more excited for A-Life. The system seems to be so hyped up by the community, so I'm wondering what direction it would take the game. It seems like A-Life would just make the game so much better, with the game feeling more vibrant and alive. Plus, a system like that couldn't hurt, right? Unless performance starts taking a dip, which they said they're looking at anyway, then no. But that's not the only thing players will start looking at in the future. Mods. Who doesn't love a good old mod? Vortex already has around 600 mods with 5.5 million downloads, and the game's only been out for a few weeks. I feel like this is a game that is extremely likely to have a long lifespan due to its modding community. Already, there are a few mods that are looking cool, and most are just simple additions to the game that change really little things, but it still gives us a good look into the future as it shows that modders are already enthusiastic about the game. Well, I guess it's time to wrap this up then. Overall, Stalker 2 isn't perfect. The game has its issues: performance, balancing, A-Life not properly implemented, and a few more. It has the shell of a great game, especially considering the circumstances the game was made in. Honestly, I think the game is worth a play. The story is amazing, the graphics are great, and the modding community is enthusiastic. This leads me to my final rating. 8 out of 10. Honestly, really well deserved. And I'd like to thank the devs for such a great game, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed my video. I've been Matthew, and this has been Stalker 2, Heart of Chernobyl.